Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. So far in this plot hole series, we've covered Philosopher's Stone, Chamber of Secrets, and Prisoner of Azkaban. And if one thing has become obvious through this process, it's that the Harry Potter books, although incredible, are not without their little inconsistencies and world-building issues. And in Goblet of Fire, things get a bit worse. Because this is the book where Rowling massively expands the scope of the wizarding world. Suddenly we've got international magical schools, the Triwizard Tournament, the Quidditch World Cup, Voldemort's full return. The world becomes much bigger, much darker, and honestly, much more complicated. And while Goblet of Fire is widely considered one of the strongest and most important books in the series, it's also one that introduces a lot of magical concepts that create some serious logical problems. Not Time Turner level problems, but close. And just like in the previous videos, I want to quickly clarify what I actually mean by plot hole, because people online use the term way too broadly. A character making a mistake is not a plot hole. A character acting emotionally is not a plot hole. I'm specifically talking about moments where the story seems to contradict its own rules, establish information, or internal logic. Before we jump in, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to support future content. Let's dive into it. Voldemort's return. One of the more interesting plot holes in Goblet of Fire comes right at the end of the book after Harry returns from the graveyard. By this point in time, Harry has just witnessed a congregation of Death Eaters, Cedric's murder, and perhaps most significant of all, Voldemort's return. And yet somehow Fudge still completely refuses to believe him. We know that Fudge has adopted this attitude primarily out of fear, which to be fair is consistent with this character. But the fact remained that there is a magical method of verifying what Harry is telling them: the pensieve. In theory, Harry could have simply placed the memory of the graveyard into the pensieve and shown it directly to Fudge, and this probably would have solved almost all of the problems of Order of the Phoenix before they even started. Now, to be fair, there is one explanation for why the Ministry may not have been on board for this, and it's the fact that memories can be altered. This, of course, means that not all memories are credible. But the series also makes it clear that altering memories convincingly is highly advanced magic. In Half-Blood Prince, even Slughorn's modified memory is messy enough that Dumbledore immediately notices something is wrong with it. Meanwhile, Harry at this point in the story is only 14, hasn't started occlumency lessons, struggles with plenty of advanced magic, and definitely is not portrayed as some master memory manipulator. So the idea that Harry himself fabricated an entire false memory seems pretty unlikely. Another explanation I've seen is that Fudge may have simply accused Dumbledore of altering Harry's memory instead, since by this point, Fudge already believes Dumbledore is trying to undermine him politically. And this explanation probably works better. But even then, I still think this is a strong plot hole theory that's worth discussing because it creates a much larger issue for the series as a whole. If pensieves exist, then why are they almost never used in major investigations? This follows the same logic that I discussed in the last video where I mentioned Veritaserum. The Ministry imprisons people, conducts hearings, interrogates suspects, and sends people to Azkaban. But nobody ever says, maybe we should examine the memory directly. Of course, one of the biggest problems with calling this a true plot hole comes back to Fudge himself, because realistically, Fudge probably didn't want the truth verified. By the end of Goblet of Fire, Fudge is terrified. Voldemort returning would mean mass panic, political instability, and perhaps most importantly, a direct threat to Fudge's own power and authority. So even if Harry had offered to show his memory in a pensieve, there's a good chance Fudge simply would have rejected it outright. But it certainly doesn't mean the pensieve wasn't sitting there as a potential way to prove him wrong, had anyone actually wanted to use it. The Triwizard contract. One of the strangest plot holes in Goblet of Fire is the idea that Harry is somehow magically forced to compete in the Triwizard Tournament, despite never actually entering it. Throughout the book, everybody keeps repeating the same thing. The Goblet of Fire constitutes a binding magical contract, and because of that, Harry apparently has no choice but to participate. But here's the problem. Harry never put his name into the goblet. Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, secretly entered Harry under a fourth school using a powerful Confundus charm. Harry himself never agreed to anything. He never volunteered. He never signed a contract. He never even touched the goblet. So why is the contract binding on him? That's where the logic starts to break down. Because if magical contracts in the wizarding world can be forced onto unwilling people without their knowledge or consent, that has horrifying implications for the entire series. It would mean that anyone could potentially bind another person into a magical agreement, including the unbreakable vow, as long as they were proficient enough at the spell. And the reaction from the professors makes it even weirder. Nobody says, wait a minute, Harry never entered. Instead, everyone immediately accepts, well, the magic says he has to compete now. Even Dumbledore, who knows something suspicious happened, ultimately goes along with it. And what makes this feel even more like a plot hole is that the consequences are never properly explained. What actually happens if Harry refuses? Does he die, lose his magic, become cursed? Nothing. The story never tells us. Everyone simply acts as though the contract is absolute, even though the person supposedly bound by it never consented to it in the first place. Now, to be fair, the series does heavily imply that refusing would carry some kind of severe consequence. Characters repeatedly stress that Harry has to compete, and Moody even says, "It's very simple, Karkaroff. Someone put Potter's name in that goblet knowing he'd have to compete if it came out." So Rowling clearly wants us to understand that this is serious. But again, that only makes the problem bigger. Because if the punishment for refusing is truly severe, like death or some kind of curse, then that means the Wizarding world has created a magical system where people can apparently be bound to deadly contracts without their consent. And if the punishment isn't severe, then why doesn't Harry simply refuse? The whole thing creates this strange logical middle ground, where the contract is treated as unbelievably important, the consequences are treated as terrifying, but the actual rules are never explained. And because of that, the entire central premise of Goblet of Fire ends up hinging on a magical contract whose mechanics are so vague that the audience is basically forced to just accept that the magic says so. Portkeys and a broken plan. Portkeys are one of those magical objects that initially seem pretty simple, but once it's revealed that the Triwizard Cup itself is a portkey, the entire logic behind the Triwizard Tournament starts becoming much harder to justify. Initially, the plan is pretty clever. Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, secretly turns the Triwizard Cup into a portkey. Harry touches it at the end of the maze, gets transported to the graveyard, and everybody assumes he was simply killed during the final task. But here's the issue. If Barty Crouch Jr. was capable of secretly creating a portkey inside Hogwarts in the first place, then why did they need this absurdly elaborate year-long plan at all? Why did he spend months impersonating Moody, rigging the Goblet of Fire, guiding Harry through every task, just to get him to touch an object? Fake Moody has direct access to Harry for an entire school year. He teaches his classes, he speaks to Harry privately on multiple occasions, and he even pulls Harry aside multiple times throughout the book. At any point, Crouch Jr. could have seemingly turned almost anything into a portkey, a textbook, a quill, anything innocuous that Harry might touch without too much thought. This becomes even more convoluted when you consider how portkeys are presented elsewhere in the series. At the Quidditch World Cup, portkeys are heavily regulated by the Ministry, and activated at precise times to transport large groups of wizards without causing chaos or exposing magic to muggles. Yet somehow Barty Crouch Jr. is able to secretly create a fully functioning portkey inside Hogwarts, one powerful enough to bypass the school's magical protections entirely. And what makes this even weirder is that Voldemort's entire resurrection plan seems to depend on Harry winning the tournament, despite the very real possibility of things going wrong on a number of occasions. He could have died fighting the dragon, drowned in the lake, gotten seriously injured, or just genuinely lost to one of the other competitors. The entire plan relies on an absurd amount of luck and coincidence. Now, to be fair, Crouch Jr. was subtly helping Harry throughout the tournament, but even with all of that help, the plan is still unbelievably risky, because ultimately Voldemort's return depends on a teenage boy successfully surviving a year-long magical death tournament. There's also another detail that weakens the secret accidental death explanation even further. The Triwizard Cup portkey doesn't just transport Harry to the graveyard, it transports him back. After Cedric dies and Voldemort returns, Harry grabs the cup again and it sends him straight back to Hogwarts with Cedric's body, which means the portkey was apparently designed as a round trip. And that creates a weird contradiction in Voldemort's plan, because if Harry was supposed to die quietly in the graveyard, why would the portkey even return him to Hogwarts afterward? In fact, the return trip arguably ruins the entire plan, because the moment Harry's body reappears at Hogwarts, everyone immediately knows something went wrong. If Voldemort truly wanted Harry's death to look accidental, then sending the body back makes very little sense. Harry and the Thestrals. This one's a classic that most of you have probably heard of before, and while there is an official explanation from Rowling on record, I'm going to keep it in this list because honestly, I don't totally buy it. A Thestral is a breed of winged horse with skeletal and reptilian features, resembling a sort of evil Pegasus. These creatures pull the carriages at Hogwarts and are only visible to those who have witnessed and understood death. Harry isn't able to see Thestrals until the beginning of Order of the Phoenix, following the death of Cedric Diggory. But one thing that many fans pointed out right away is that by the end of Goblet of Fire, after Cedric has already been murdered, Harry still describes the Hogwarts carriages as horseless. By this point, Harry has technically witnessed death multiple times. His parents' murder as a baby, Quirrell's death in Philosopher's Stone, and most recently, Cedric Diggory's death in the graveyard. Which means he probably should be able to see them by now. Now, Rowling has addressed this directly, explaining that simply witnessing death is not enough. According to her, a person must fully process and emotionally understand the death before Thestrals become visible. Everyone has said to me that Harry saw people die before he could see the Thestrals. Just to clear this up once and for all, this was not a mistake. I would be the first to say that I've made mistakes in the books, but this was not a mistake. I really thought this one through. Harry did not see his parents die. He was 1 year old and in a cot at the time. Although you never see that scene, I wrote it and then cut it. He didn't see it. He was too young to appreciate it. When you find out about the Thestrals, you find that you can see them only when you really understand death in a broader sense, when you really know what it means. Someone said that Harry saw Quirrell die, but that's not true. He was unconscious when Quirrell died in Philosopher's Stone. He did not know until he came around that Quirrell had died when Voldemort left his body. Then you have Cedric. With Cedric, fair point. Harry had just seen Cedric die when he got back into the carriages to go back to Hogsmeade Station. I thought about that at the end of Goblet, because I've known from the word go what was drawing the carriages. From Chamber of Secrets, in which there are carriages drawn by invisible things, I have known what was there. I decided that it would be an odd thing to do right at the end of a book. Anyone who has suffered a bereavement knows that there is the immediate shock, but that it takes a little while to appreciate fully that you will never see that person again. Until that had happened, I did not think Harry could see the Thestrals. That means that when he goes back, he saw these spooky things. It set the tone for Phoenix, which is a much darker book. Rowling's explanation does a pretty good job of clarifying some of the earlier deaths in the series. Harry didn't truly witness his parents' death in a meaningful way because he was only a baby in a cot at the time. He was just too young to comprehend what was happening. Similarly, Harry didn't actually witness Quirrell's death either, because he'd already passed out before Quirrell died and only learned about it afterward. Cedric, however, was different. He fully witnessed Cedric's murder and its aftermath. Rowling explains that by the end of Goblet of Fire, Harry was still in shock over Cedric's death and hadn't fully processed what had happened yet. It was only after spending the summer replaying the events of the graveyard and coming to terms with Cedric being truly gone forever that Harry was finally able to see the Thestrals at the beginning of Order of the Phoenix. But something feels off about this one. It seems a little too convenient that the rules surrounding Thestrals only became more clearly defined after readers noticed the inconsistency, which is why for me this one will always feel more like a retcon. Polyjuice voice. Now, this one isn't really a true plot hole, but I wanted to mention it because I've seen so many people bring it up as one over the years. It's the Polyjuice voice inconsistency. Specifically, why does Barty Crouch Jr. perfectly sound like Mad-Eye Moody for an entire year when earlier films established that Polyjuice Potion doesn't change your voice? In Chamber of Secrets, when Harry and Ron transform into Crabbe and Goyle, they still sound like themselves. Same thing later in Deathly Hallows when the trio infiltrate the Ministry. Their appearances change, but the actors keep their normal voices. But in Goblet of Fire, fake Moody doesn't sound like Barty Crouch Jr. at all. He sounds exactly like Moody the entire time. But here's the plain and simple truth. This is just a movieism. Because in the books, Polyjuice Potion does change your voice. When Harry and Ron become Crabbe and Goyle in Chamber of Secrets, they don't just look like them. They sound like them too. So Barty Crouch Jr. perfectly impersonating Moody in the book actually makes complete sense. The inconsistency is really something the films created for practical reasons. In Chamber of Secrets and Deathly Hallows, the filmmakers clearly wanted audiences to still recognize Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert Grint, and Emma Watson during Polyjuice scenes, so they kept their voices the same. But in Goblet of Fire, they needed the Mad-Eye Moody reveal at the end to work. If fake Moody had sounded like Barty Crouch Jr. the whole movie, the twist would have lasted about 11 seconds. So this one's less Rowling broke her own rules, and more the movies changed the rules whenever it was cinematically convenient. And on that note, that about sums up my list of plot holes for Goblet of Fire. If you haven't seen parts 1, 2, or 3 already, go check them out next. Also, if I missed any plot holes, let me know down in the comment section below, and I'll mention them with credit in a future video. If you enjoy the content, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, remember, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live